things that I've always thought was really awesome is when you were in WWA, you had this awesome T-shirt. I'm a T-shirt guy when it comes to pro wrestling merch, and yours is a golden cobra, and it says Bravado across it. Is that something that you designed, or is that something that came from somebody, or you commissioned it from somebody else?
So essentially, with that, that was just kind of something that I kind of fancied up in my head, kind of put pen to paper, tried to sketch it out on my own. I'm no artist myself, but drawing is something I always kind of did instead of my schoolwork. So I started out with like a rough outline of it. And then when I got to talking to the screen printing company about what I was trying to go for, they said, feel free to send over the general idea of what you have. And I took my design to them. They kind of just brought one back to me, and that was where we ended up because I said, we don't need to go any further. This is exactly what I had in mind. It looks way better than I thought, in my head. So we're just gonna pick it up and roll with it.
And that is one of the cool things about indie wrestling that I like is the designs of t-shirts. And you kind of it's a little more personal to me when you see an indie t-shirt versus a t-shirt from WWE, because you're right, you guys have a hand in it. I don't know how they do it in WWE, but it just seems like it's a little more like that is definitely your character, which your t-shirt reflects your character really well. And then it just seems more personal. Is that kind of a is that something that which could be able to be said, or is that am I just way off base on that?
I think you're onto something there, yeah. Because I mean, truthfully, I've only had that one. I've been looking
Mhm.
into the idea of trying to get a different design out, but I've also done a few, where I brought a few different orders of bringing back that same shirt, which I'm thinking about doing again, just to go on record and say that. And I think that you hit it on the head. Kind of gives people to be a little more creative, express themselves in their own way, a little more intimately, I guess I could say. Um, the only thing I would say that I really run into is that sometimes these WWE shirts they are you can have a little more in terms of design that you can do with it. Sometimes it gets a little more expensive because I have a lot of ideas sometimes that I want to do stuff more. Want to put something on the back, want to design it up just a little bit, but that also comes with a cost. So, but no, you said it right for sure.
So when I saw you initially in the WWA, you were a ref. So without pulling back the curtain too much, without exposing the magic of pro wrestling, was that like did you go into it wanting to be a ref, or was it just kind of this is how we're going to work you into the ring?
Without going too far into it, yeah, that was more so of like this is a way for us to kind of establish, kind of get something going for you, prior to coming into that particular angle and establishing the regime with Tony Evans later on, picking up a few more members and kind of doing our thing for a couple of years there. I had done a couple handfuls of practice matches, nothing too particular, nothing where I had been able to establish myself as, Jake Bravado and build upon that. And work that into what I've done today. So that was definitely a way for us to kind of, you know, I guess slide in everything without going too crazy and without being too abrupt,
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
And then so you teamed up with Tony Evans there for a while. That is one thing I do like about WWE is their factions. I think their factions typically work out really well with what they do and their shows, and everybody can keep up with stuff like that on YouTube or whatever on social media. When you kind of got onto your own, did I've talked to Buddy Lee Bodell about this before. You got paired up with him, and he kind of led us into the story. Now, that was something that you guys just kind of decided to work together and thought it would work. Is that right, or am I kind of wrong on that one?
Well, truthfully, the whole nature of that was something that I had no idea was coming up.
Mm.
At that particular time, there had been a reshuffling of some plans. No real idea was brought to me until about the night that it happened. So that was just kind of something that was sprung on me. And like I said, I don't really know the too in detail on how we got to that point. So it was kind of something for me to pick up and run with.
And that's what I like
So I
his
mean,
character.
he was used to doing that a lot more. He was definitely a little more erratic, I guess you could say,
Sure.
compared to some of the managers I've worked with in the past. So it was definitely an interesting element, to what I do.
Yeah, and that's what it's a stark contrast, I think. You watching him, his him as a manager in that role is really good, and I've told him so. I love his promos; it's great. And when you as a wrestler, you are more of that. I don't want to say sadistic, but more fine. It's like you want to be finely tuned. You're that heel that is, I'm out there to do something, and I'm going to get it done kind of guy. At least that's what I take away from it. Um, which, and this is a question I'm going to ask you straight out. Do you? I can't remember if you've been a face. I know I've seen you as a heel so many times, but which is for you personally? Which is more? I don't want to say easy because nothing in pro wrestling is easy, but which is more kind of your wheelhouse, being a heel or being a face?
I would definitely say being a heel. I don't want to say it's easier, like you said, but
Yeah,
it definitely it's a different style all on
sure.
its own, And I mean, I've worked some neutral locations, some places that were new to me, and I was new to them, and so I've tried to, you don't. How do I think about putting this? There's always going to be ways for you to portray, who somebody should root for, who somebody should root against. There's always going
Yeah,
to be ways for you to
yeah.
work that in, of course. It's a lot easier for people to get into a match when something is set up that way. But I have worked neutral where I'm not necessarily a heel,
Mhm.
where it's not necessarily something for me to go out and dictate the flow of the match, try to get the people over onto this particular individual side. But it just kind of tends to gravitate that way
Yeah.
because I don't know if it's just my face or what it is about me, but some people I've tried, I've tried to
Right.
be better with the people, and it just ends up going. It's a lot easier, a lot better for me to be a heel. I prefer it more. It's a lot more interesting and fun to me.
And a lot of across pro wrestling in general, you hear talent, men and women, talk about that being it's just more fun. It's more fun to be a heel because you're not trying to get everybody to cheer you or laugh at you. It's
Mhm.
easy to make somebody not want to root for you. Like he said, it's not maybe not necessarily boo you, they're not going to boo you out of the building, but maybe you poke somebody in the eyes or just something real sneaky and dirty. It's real easy to get people not to like you in the ring. Would you agree with that?
I would say so. I would probably put 90% of my work as being predominantly heel whenever I'm in a match. I
Yeah.
had, like I said, some early matches where I tried the baby face thing, and it's like, maybe this isn't, what Jake Bravado needs to be. And that's how we got to that point of being Jake Bravado. It's
Yeah.
something that's gonna kind of come off as a little arrogant, just exude a little more as opposed to shine. It just
Sure.
wasn't necessarily my cup of tea.
Right. And I think the name's great. I think Jake Bravado is a great wrestling name. Um, or as I mean, as how many that one I've been wanting to ask people in the business this. I call it wrestling. I grew up calling it wrestling. Everybody does in
Mm.
my area. And some people, I'm not saying it's offensive because it's really not. I mean, it's just kind of a joke. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny, a little play on the word. When someone like me calls it wrestling or still calls people in it pro wrestlers or not sports entertainers, is that a real thing that bothers people in the pro wrestling business?
It's never really one that's bothered me. I don't know how. I can't speak for everybody on that
Sure.
because I was always kind of kid watching it growing up. I would try to correct people. I'm like, this is wrestling. This is real stuff. Like
Yeah.
it's still to me, damn it. There's that kind of thing for
Yeah.
me. So I was always, trying to defend it in any way I could. So I wouldn't say that ever bothered anybody. I had relatives that would call it that. My aunt would brag about how she went to the Coliseum back in the day and got kicked out for trying to hit Jerry Lawler with her purse and that sort of thing. And I mean,
Sure.
it was wrestling to her. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just I don't know, it's just a goofy thing, I guess. It kind of to me it makes it more fun. But so let's keep going with you were in WWA, you did a lot of great stuff there. You you move around a lot, and I won't say move around a lot, but you show up a lot of different promotions and stuff like that. Is your scope? Are you trying to widen kind of your field where you're going to go, or is this kind of testing the waters somewhere else?
Without a doubt, I'm definitely trying to broaden everything as much as I can, trying to get out to as many new areas, so to speak, as possible. I'm trying to get to a point to where I can wrestle around Chicago a little more frequently. Even down south, I've done a few matches down there. I did some work in Pittsburgh, or outside of Pittsburgh, I should say, for a little while. So I'm just trying to get to a point to where I can really be known as Jake Bravado anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah,
And that's a lot easier said than done, especially when you factor in, having to have a life outside of being in the
sure.
business.
Yeah,
And as much as everybody wants to make it their priority to be the business all the time, it's a little bit harder for everybody to get to compared to some. And so I think in order for me to get to that point, I do need to expand. I do need to get my name out. I do need to network. I need to, get a little bit of Jake Bravado everywhere.
yeah.
And so that's my current goal at the moment, is to just kind of expand as much as possible, try to get um, my name out, try to network with the right people, and try to get to where I want to be so I can achieve the goals that I want to get in pro wrestling.
And you talk about kind of like making time, being able to do it. We've gotten to a point where, because a lot of the older wrestlers, some don't, but a lot of times you'll hear some talk about paying your dues, which for a lot of these guys, paying your dues was living out of your car. Like you and I have mentioned before, we talked about Stone Cold Steve Austin, uh, eating basically just having a bag of potatoes, and that was his food, and he was living in his car, but he was doing it to get into pro wrestling. I think now it's more acceptable to, yeah, I've got a job, but I also really want to be a pro wrestler and I'm doing what I can to make that dream happen, because you're still living your dream just like the other guy. So do you think that it's more acceptable to do it that way?
I mean, I would say really you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And ultimately, if you
Sure.
can afford to be in a position to where you can be secure and still go and invest in yourself as much as possible and do it, one thing's got to give, one, it's either going to be you're 100% secure, you've got a great job, you're all locked down, you're good to go, but that's only going to give you so much time. And I mean, I don't want to say that anybody having a family is impeding on, that, but that's
Mhm.
another factor. If somebody works 40 hours a week, but they've got a wife and kids, it's going to ultimately weigh on the amount of time that they can really put into it.
Right.
And then, on the other hand, there's guys that this is all that they do. They go from town to town. That this is what it takes sometimes,
Mm.
just depending on what you're willing to put into it. Everybody's path is different. So I've been on both sides of it. I've been in a position where I'm secure, but I'm like, man, I'm just not wrestling enough. I'm not going to be able to expand and get to where I want to go with as little time as I'm putting into it. But there's also been times where I've been, man, I should probably dial it back and really stop trying to,
Yeah.
make this my priority at the
Mm.
moment. And so it's just kind of a tough spot where I'm in now, because I've had several conversations, not to say about quitting entirely or anything like that, but I'm like, really, how much more of this can be the number one priority in my life right now versus how much do I really want to make something out of it? It needs to
Right.
be.
And I think it's across the board in entertainment sometimes. I don't think
Mhm.
that's just pro wrestling. I think pro wrestling is the one that's most uh well, I guess synonymous with it. But I mean, look at stand-up comedy. If you The guys that really make it typically start out not making anything. I mean, working some crap job, but the time that they do get sometimes is for free, or maybe it's like just 20 bucks, but it's kind of that same, you got to be in it to win it in a way, right? So
Exactly.
you're talking about networking, and I I talked to Aldolfo, who is a part of Square Circle Expo, last week, and we had talked about word of mouth still being king, and I still think that's right. I still believe in, if I saw you somewhere and I know a promoter or I am a promoter, I'm like, hey, I just saw this guy. We need to get him rather than just happening to come across it on Instagram or Facebook. Is that still kind of the kind of best way to go about getting your name out there, is word of mouth?
I would say 100% without a doubt. I've found it a little more challenging than I would have anticipated as far as trying to get in connection and interact with new people, get into places that I haven't previously been or have any legs to stand on versus, if I've been in the car with somebody or hopped in and, accompanied somebody to a show, it's as simple as them being able to go up to a promoter and being like, "Hey, here's my guy, Jake. He's good at what he does. If you've got a spot, he can do it. He'd be good for you in the future, that sort of thing." I've been in that position to where, simply just tagging along has gotten me set up for future opportunities. I could sing praises all day for the kind of guys that helped me get my foot into several different
Mhm.
places, Derek Neal being one of them, Daniel Eads being another one. There's, just it's invaluable what they, simple
Right.
word of mouth can do, like you said. So I would, without a doubt, that's still the most prominent way that somebody's going to take notice of you, because especially in the age where we live, everybody's on the internet.
Yep.
Anybody can be anybody on the internet. Someone can throw highlight reels or build a resume, and I mean I've been that guy, so I can speak from experience. Somebody can put together all they can to make it look presentable to somebody, but at the end of the day, that's not the same as being there, being present, accounted for, having somebody in their ear being like, "Hey, he's got his bag,"
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I found myself being able to and still go off of opportunities that were open for me just from simply being around somebody that's able to vouch.
Yeah. And that's you brought up Derek Neal. He is one I remember watching quite some time ago in WWE. Uh, and it's really cool to see. And every person I have on here, I hope gets to live out their dream to the point that they want. You know what I mean? But he's one that we've seen. He's traveled around the world doing pro wrestling, and not just him, but you have guys like Superior Tony Evans, who's done OVW and doing other stuff. Corey Calhoun, who's been all over the place. You you guys have had such a great group in WWA. How awesome is it to see these guys and girls start basically traveling around doing wrestling shows?
I love to see it, man, because I mean, it's just cool to see a lot of things come full circle.
Mm,
Especially when you're in a position to be like, "Hey, I know that guy." I
yeah.
mean, if my memory serves me right, I want to say Derek just did some time over in Germany. I don't know if he went to anywhere surrounding that area. But it was really cool to see he's at the point where he can go international with it. Somebody that, when I first got into the business and met, I had no idea who he was. I had no idea the kind of work that he put in. And to see him be able to get to the point where it's really paying off for him, it's awesome. Tony's doing
Yep.
so much with OVW, and I know for the longest time, he was just kind of in a position that I felt like he was just kind of there, and now he's one of the marquee guys. So it's
Yep.
awesome for him. Corey Calhoun doing stuff in Mexico. I didn't picture that. I don't want to say anything like I'm saying anything bad about him, but
No.
when I first met him, he was a skinny 15-year-old
He
kid,
was a
and I was like,
kid.
man, he's out
Yeah.
here wrestling. He's
Yeah.
he's really good. I didn't expect that, and
Yep.
now he's able to go on and network and do the Nightmare Factory training. Now
Yeah.
he's winning championships in Mexico. It's really invigorating to kind of see where your peers can go from it. I know Myron Reed was another guy who did WWA early on,
Mhm.
and it's at some point it was necessary for us to be able to move on from being just in this centralized area.
Right.
But it's cool to see the points that they've gotten to once they have done that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I said, man, it makes my skin crawl in a good way. It makes
Yeah.
me really happy to see a lot of those people be able to continue to climb the ladder to get where they want to go. And
Yeah.
I'm just, hoping I can get to the point where I can say that too.
Right, and that's what I think is the best part is, and everybody I've had on here has always talked about how great the locker room is at WWA, making those friendships and being able to talk to those people. It's almost like, yeah, you're very happy for them, but in turn, it's like, I can do this too. You know what I mean? So it gives you that, the kind of that extra push, like you're I can do it. You know, I know these people, they've done it. Why can't I do it too? Kind of deal. Do you have a favorite WrestleMania match, or do you have just like a list of matches that it's just all across the board? This is how great WrestleMania can be at times, or what do you have? What's your favorite WrestleMania moment?
I think it's just kind of here, there, and everywhere for me because I mean, growing up as a wrestling fan, I wasn't able to watch much wrestling. And I
Yeah,
know that's kind of contradictory because I really didn't get to keep up a whole lot with what was going on. You know, I was always living through the video games or the action figures, but only every so often would I be able to actually watch it. And WrestleMania 20 was really special for me because it was the first one I got to watch live with a friend of mine. You know, we were 9 or 10 or something at the time.
yeah,
And it's a lot easier for me to remember that one compared to so many others just because at the time it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. So as far as like favorite matches, it's hard for me to really pinpoint a lot of those. But favorite moments, I would say just collectively throughout time, there has been a handful of different moments that have really stuck with me for different reasons. You know,
mhm,
I was big on Roman Reigns. A lot of people didn't really like seeing him being the Undertaker when he was still doing the big dog stuff. A lot of people
yeah,
didn't like him up until, you know, he became what he is today. So
right,
for me at the time, it was cool to see that they put that much faith in him
yeah,
to retire the Undertaker, who we all knew and cherished for so long. So between stuff like that, whenever I first got back into wrestling was I think 31. So unfortunately I missed 30, but
yeah,
you know, came back around. uh Seth Rollins getting RKO'd with Randy Orton was one of the first things I
yeah,
saw whenever I got back into wrestling after 5 to 6 years. That was a really cool moment that's probably going to stick in my head. But when it comes to like the most important ones, I would say it's all who you are, who you like, and for me, it's all about the emotion.
mhm,
I could sit here and watch football all day as much as I love it, and it's going to make me feel a certain type of way, one way or the other. But nothing was going to make me feel the same way that wrestling does.
right,
You know, we've seen several matches where people they don't have to lock up for the first 5 to 6 minutes because the crowd is losing their mind,
yep,
one way or another, and that just shows the kind of work that they put in to get people invested up to that point. And it's just it gives me goosebumps, you know, watching that kind of stuff. I'll come up out of my chair, I'll scream, I'll go crazy. I'll be like I'm 4 years old in here
yeah,
anytime I watch like especially WrestleMania.
yeah,
So but just going back on like, you know, emotional moments that you can really hold to yourself, a lot of people might look back on this differently than I do and kind of, you know, mar it in their memory. But my first WrestleMania, the end of the show was Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit
yep,
being able to come together, two lifelong friends, finally at the pinnacle of their goals, you know, and they were just able to have that moment. And it's hard for me to scratch that from my mind, especially now,
mhm,
knowing how much work they put in to get to that point, what it took, the sacrifices made, like we spoke about, for them to even be able to be in that position, much less have that moment to themselves. So
right.
you know, like you said, yeah, I think just throughout history, there's just a lot of different moments that really kind of that I hold dear.
Yeah, and that's what we did off of the camera. We did talk about, excuse me, we did talk about how just WCW guys, especially those ones that stood out, didn't at the time wouldn't have been champion in WWE. You know, because I mean they had their main guys, you know, Hogan, all that. But you talk about guys like Benoit, Eddie, Rey Mysterio, Chris Jericho, who ended up being all these guys ended up being champions in WWE when and kind of when they were super hot with WCW, the WWE would have had nothing to do with these guys ever being a champion. So you're right. Those are those moments that you're just, especially like I was a big WCW fan, and I know you talked about the Luchadors with me before, or the cruiserweight division. It is such a great moment because I was so invested in WCW when they shut down, like the last Nitro. I didn't watch wrestling for years. I was done because I didn't want to watch
Yeah,
WWF or WWE at the time. And so, like, for me, yeah, to come back and see those guys start winning championships, it's a huge deal. Where on social media can people find you?
I've got Instagram, I've got Twitter, I've got Facebook. All of those are going to be at Jake Bravado. I've got some shows coming up this month that I am going to be posting about, talking about with those. So they're kind of exploring the idea of getting some other ways of putting, reels and that sort of thing out there to kind of broaden that up a little bit.
I really appreciate you hanging out with me, talking about some pro wrestling. Everybody knows you can find out my stuff on Instagram at Wrestleverse, YouTube at Wrestleverse, Spotify at Wrestleverse. All the episodes will be up soon. So, yeah, thanks to you so much for taking the time to talk about pro wrestling with me today.